Tēnā koutou katoa, ko airangi mai inarangi ngā whenua o oko te puna no whakatua hou ko Gillian Dudgeon toka ingawa hei tumanaki tuaroa aho kei te amarangi mataranga matua mo te ropo tukurutanga no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello everybody, here we are at our investment planning webinar. It's great to see that we've got so many people online and still more people joining us. I thought I would just start with something to set the scene for today. So if we want to move to the next slide, Carol. For whina tekete te maturanga, so fill the basket of knowledge. So today is about helping to explain the plan guidance that we have issued to the sector. We obviously do this every year, but we always know that people have questions, so we thought it would be really good to set up the session today. So hopefully everyone will leave today with a little more knowledge than when we joined. So if we look at today's session. I'm Gillian Dudgeon. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of Delivery within the Tertiary Education Commission, and I'm joined by Jane Duncan, who is online, who, when we get to the question and answer sessions, is highly likely to help me answer a number of the questions, because I'm sure from experience that you've probably got some very technical questions to ask as well. So we're going to talk through the funding environment for 27. We're going to talk about the guidance to support your planning and the importance of that. We're going to talk about the next steps, and then we're going to run through question time. So the webinar is for providers and is targeted at providers who currently receive our funding. We're here to give you clarity about the investment environment and what it means for your planning. I know many of you will be already working on your investment plans, so this session is about helping set expectations. Please note that we have the chat function turned off, but if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function. It's next to the chat function at the top of your screens, hopefully. It has got a couple of bubbles there with a question mark. And we're also recording the session for the people that aren't able to attend, or if you feel like you need to listen to it again, then you're able to do that. And we'll let you know when it's available on our YouTube account, and obviously a copy of the presentation will be available for everyone else as well. So I think hopefully pretty much everyone should have joined us by now. So let's crack on into the presentation. I'm going to start with a picture. Investment planning for 27 is taking place in very challenging fiscal environment. And so that's not only in the tertiary sector, but as the economy as a whole. And so we expect at this point in time that the funding environment for 27 will be very similar to this year. Obviously, we have a budget, which will be announced at the end of May. But our expectation is I wouldn't expect a significant amount of change. And that's the basis on which we have put together the plan guidance for next year. We're expecting enrolments to remain higher than the funding we have available. So we know the level of enrolments for 2026 is very high, and we're expecting at the moment, based on what we know at this point in time, for that to continue into 27. So that means that we're again going to have to make trade-offs across the system. And so for many of you, that may see a reduced amount of investment. Now that is in the context where we're aware that for many providers in 26 received less funding than they received in 25. At this point, that may continue into 27 as well. So this means when you are doing your planning, you need to expect a constrained or reduced funding. And I think the earlier you factor this into your thinking, the easier it is for you to deliberate about priorities. And I know, spending a lot of time talking to people in the sector, that everyone wants to plan on growth. So I think when you're thinking about that, you need to be having those discussions and planning in the context of the funding that the government has available to support that. So recognising that, one of the things we're doing differently this year is being very, very clear in our plan guidance. And when you receive your indicative allocations in June, we'll look to communicate any decreases through that process. And we can talk about that later in the presentation. So we want to ensure that you get advice as early as possible about what the realistic amount of funding is that we're going to be able to provide you for the 27 year. So on to the next slide. Let's go back to investment decisions. So how are these decisions made, and how are they shaped, and what goes into plan guidance? Wider government priorities. So that's economic growth and productivity, better educational outcomes for learners, and careful public spending. And as we know, different governments have different priorities. So the plan guidance we have put out to the sector is based on this government's priorities. We've got a new tertiary education strategy, and so that sets the tertiary education system's direction for the next 5 years. And we give effect to it through our disciplined investment decisions. Now, when we're looking at the tertiary education strategy, there are 5 key priorities. Achievement, so how are our learners actually doing? Economic impact and innovation. Access and participation. Integration and collaboration. And then international education. So we've refreshed the target investment priorities for higher, vocational and foundation education for 2027, which is another really important reason for you to read the plan guidance document. In fact, when I was at the PTE peak bodies recently, I said if you do nothing else, you need to ensure you read the forward by Tim Fowler, our Chief Executive, and those key priorities. One of the other areas that obviously also informs this is performance. So fiscal sustainability of your individual entities and the education outcomes for all the learners. Strong and consistent learner outcomes sit underneath all our priorities. So if you're delivering a priority area and only 2 in 10 of your learners actually get the qualification, being in the priority area does not guarantee you funding. In fact, in that situation, you're likely to have your funding reduced or removed. So how learners are doing in the system is very important and forms part of the process when we're looking at. So we expect providers to make evidence-based choices about what you're doing and ensuring that your learners are very well supported while they're with you. So how do we make these funding decisions? We go to the next slide. We consider funding allocations across all providers in the system. We take a holistic approach to assessing each individual provider for future funding. It's not driven by one factor alone. So we look at a range of factors and we have a really informed conversation based on all the information we have available to us. We'll focus funding on the things that matter most. So provision that aligns with government and investment priorities, how it responds to employer and community needs, and how it demonstrates those really strong learner outcomes. When making decisions, we look at educational performance. So that's course and qualification completions and retention. We look at commitment to improve learner outcomes. So we recognise that some providers are dealing with, cohorts of learners that find it harder than others. But we want to see consistent increases in how learners are going through their different qualifications. The contribution to the network of provision in the context of the government and TC's priorities. So we don't want to see massive duplication of many, many providers delivering exactly the same things into the same community. That is not the best use of funding. That makes it really difficult for individual providers to be sustainable. So we look across the entire country about where provision is being delivered. We look at where the gaps are, and we look at the quality of it to ensure we get a match between all of those things. And we look at your organisation's capability and sustainability. And that's really important when we're looking at financial sustainability, because as an organisation, if you're spending all your time trying to work out, where the money's coming from and how you're going to survive, the chances are you don't have sufficient capability to invest back in supporting your learners. So that's why that's really important to us. So performance and evidence are really central to our decisions and our appetite for risk is low. We're a government agency. So look really closely at your delivery, especially where it sits outside priority areas or where your outcomes aren't strong. Because we are going to be directing funding to provision that demonstrates strong outcomes and clear alignment to priority areas. Where outcomes are weak or provisions not aligned to priority areas, then our investment may be reduced so that we can take that funding and reallocate it to support priority provision elsewhere. So not necessarily within you as a provider, but actually take it and give it to a different provider. I mean, if you're delivering outcomes which are well below our minimum thresholds and they're in non-priority areas, why would we keep funding you when there's a priority area where there are learners wanting to study it, providers that can deliver really strong outcomes, and we're having to manage our money? So we can't just keep topping up the money. We're in an environment where we need to make sure we're directing the funding to the areas that are going to make the most impact and produce those outcomes for learners and for their communities. And those are all things that we have to consider through the investment process. Going on to the next slide, the plan guidance for 2027. So we've released plan guidance, and as I've said, please read the document. Post-budget, we'll also be releasing supplementary plan guidance. And so that will reflect any decisions that are taken in budget. So that will tell us exactly how much money we've got available for 2027, and we can provide additional guidance about that. It could also cover any new initiatives or other changes that come through the budget process. So those are two really important key documents for you to read before submitting your investment plan. So you can also read our investment plan Gazette notice, and that together with the plan guidance will give you an understanding of the investment environment, the priorities for tertiary education, and our performance expectations. That means that you will know what we're looking to invest in, understand how we assess your plan, and how you can respond to the focus areas in the plan. We've done lots of work this year on, we came out and we've had conversations with people in terms of reformatting the templates that we use. Really important because they're about guiding you through those things that are most important to us when we're doing the assessments. So let's look at a few other areas. The tertiary education strategy. Plan guidance lets you know our expectations for how you should implement those 5 test priorities, which are achievement, economic impact and innovation, access and participation, integration and collaboration, and international education. So use the guidance that's in the strategic content template to show how you are responding to the tests. And that will help us have confidence in how you're contributing to achieving those goals. Because every time I sit in a minister's office, those are the questions that they ask. How is the sector responding to the new tertiary education strategy? Vocational education and training changes. So work-based learning is transitioning to a new model. There are two key things going, and the first really important one is the learners and programs that are currently in the 7 work-based learning divisions, which are now reporting to the industry skills boards. They were previously in NZIST. Those learners and programs all need to find a new home by the end of next year. The key focus for the beginning of this year is on working through with each of those 7 entities where those learners and programs are going to go. And that's to ensure that we are looking after all of the work-based learners that we've currently got in the system and the new ones that are enrolling every day. Separately, and as we go through this year, industry skills boards supported by TC will be engaging with industry groups and employers to understand the network of work-based learning they want for their sectors. So what does that mean? Well, for some sectors, they may only currently have one national provider through one of these work-based learning divisions we've already got. But for some industry sectors or some regions and some employers, they might want work-based learning delivered by their local polytech. They may want to leverage the Wānanga network to be able to provide work-based learning. So it's really important that the industry skills boards have that opportunity to talk to their industries about what different industries need going forward. Once we've got that information, TC will then be able to ensure that any future decisions that we make about where we fund work-based learning is consistent with what industry need. And that's one of the reasons you'll see that we're not considering expanding or diversifying that network at the present, because we want to understand what industry need. This new system has been set up to give a really strong voice to industry into the education and training system. If we're not respectful and give industry that opportunity to actually tell us what they need, then we're not doing our jobs properly. So once we get that information, then that will be made available. And providers, if there are gaps identified or opportunities, that's when we'll consider approving new work-based learning. But that's not something that we really see happening as part of this investment around this year. On to learner success and disability action plans. So in response to your feedback, we've streamlined our requirements in terms of plans. You don't need to provide us separate documents. The strategic intent and the investment plan will be able to provide us all the information we need. So the strategic intent template that we've developed will support you to structure your narrative into 3 parts. Your learner success approach, your support for apprentices where that's relevant, and DAPs, so your disability action plans, and to meet those requirements in a really streamlined way. So all providers completing a strategic intent need to report the next steps they will take to develop or improve, implement their approaches. Providers with established approaches should be able to report on the progress that they're making to implement them. Now, these are all things that we would expect you will be doing as part of running your individual organisations. And we're just asking you to share those back with us in a more streamlined way. We would still expect that within your respective organisations, you're still documenting a learner success plan or a similar document and a disability action plan as part of embedding learner success into your organisation. They're really good documents for you to have, but we only need to see key parts of them based on where you are on your journey around improved learner outcomes. So separate LSPs and DAPs are not required to be submitted for new large providers for the 2027 funding, but we are keen to know what you're doing in terms of developing and progressing those areas. The next area is performance expectations, because as I've said, performance is really central to our investment decisions. Can we just move to the next slide, please? Great, thank you. We expect performance improvements to continue and a focus on closing those achievement gaps between different groups of learners. And when you look at the plan guidance document, when you look at this document and you look at the graphs that are towards the back of the document, you will see the challenge that we all have and the importance of closing those achievement gaps between different groups of learners. We expect providers that are below our specified performance rates to demonstrate yearly improvements. So we want to see an improving direction of travel. And for those that are above those, we want you to maintain them or even do better. Strong and consistent learner outcomes support continued investment, so we'll be keen to invest in that. While, as I've said, if they're weak or inconsistent, then that really increases the likelihood that we will be looking very closely at whether we should continue funding you in those areas. So in your plan guidance document, it clearly sets out those performance expectations. It clarifies what good performance looks like for different areas of provision. A DQ 8 to 10, 7 to 10, 3 to 7, work-based, provider-based, DQ 1 and 2, and youth guarantee. You've asked us to be clearer, so we have done our best to be as clear as we possibly can through this document, so that as we have conversations and we make decisions, it's very easy to see the basis on which we've made them. Now, one of the new areas is on the next slide, and that is the Tertiary Research Excellence Fund. So for those of you that have been receiving funding from the Performance-Based Research Fund, or PBRF, the government had took a decision last year to move away from that and introduce a new fund, commonly known as the TREF. So work's currently underway in terms of designing that new fund, and there have been conversations out with a number of providers about that, and there will be changes arising from this, which will be implemented for investment from 2028. So that's when those changes and that will flow through into funding. But there are some initial changes which take effect from 2027 investment, which includes a strengthened research component in your plans. So all providers who currently receive funding from the PBRF, so the Performance-Based Research Fund, need to complete a strengthened research component for the 2027 investment. And not surprisingly, we've tried to make this as easy as possible. Some of our early conversations have been that people are very happy to tell us what they're doing in the research world. So if you're doing an investment plan this year, then you can submit that information through the strategic intent template. If you have never received PBRF, you don't need to fill out that part of the template. But for all providers that are not required to submit the strategic intent for 27, we have a template called the Research Activities for Investment in 2027 template, and that's where you can provide that information to us. Okay, so for all providers that are currently getting PBRF, if you are submitting a strategic intent template this year, use that for the research component. If you're not submitting a strategic intent, you use the Research Activities for Investment for 27 template. So that's something new in this year's plan. So if we move to the next slide, we strongly recommend that you use the strategic intent template. We've refreshed the template, we've taken on board the feedback you've given us, and we've attempted to provide a structure that will help you meet the requirements set out in the Plan Gazette and Plan Guidance. Okay, so really helping you to match what the information is you're providing to us to the information we require to do that assessment for your future investment. So it reflects the significant changes for investment from 27, such as integrating the learner success components into plans, the new test requirements, and the strengthened research components. So those are quite significant changes for next year's funding. So if you use the strategic template, you can use it to structure your plan, and then we can assess your plan robustly and consistently. And that also is being designed so you don't have to repeat the information that you give to us throughout your plan. You only have to tell us a piece of information once, which I'm sure for many of you will be a welcome relief. So what else feeds into your planning? So when you are working through it, the things that you really need to be aware of are supplementary plan guidance, which comes out in June, post-budget. So as I said before, it provides further details of decisions that are taken in budget, any extra information we have about we're looking for in investment plans that wasn't available when plan guidance was published. So as you know, sometimes ministers and governments come up with a bright new idea. Supplementary plan guidance is where we put that. If there was more information we wanted to share that we didn't have available when we wrote the plan guidance document. Indicative allocations will be out in early June, so they follow quickly after the budget. And then any new workforce plans or strategies for industries where they're relevant. So as I said before, for the indicative allocations, we will be doing our best to clearly signal to you if there is going to be a material reduction in your funding for 2027. So when we look at things like areas of non-priority and areas of lower learner outcomes, looking at those factors, we're trying to build that into the indicative process. Very conscious that last year some of those decisions ended up having to be taken quite late in the year as the amount of money that we had diminished through the year. We took on board the feedback that that wasn't ideal, and so we are doing our best to be able to front load that and tell you as early as possible so that that can feed into your planning for the coming year. So, key points to remember in your planning. Total funding will be limited, okay? As I said, we need to disinvest from lower performing and some non-priority provision so that we can direct it towards the government's priority areas. And that's really important. That is why the government has priorities, so that we can invest in them. And so it's important. And that includes new innovative ways of being able to teach, new innovative programs. When funding is restricted, the only way that we can invest in those new exciting programs that could benefit learners is by moving money from one part of the system to another. I wouldn't bank on additional funding being available for many of our big funds. For some of our smaller funds, there may be some funding available, and we'll put our processes around that. But for most of our big funds, we are likely to continue with a process that if we have any money, we will be targeting and coming to you, not asking for applications coming in. We get good reporting, and this is why your reporting to us is really important, through things like the April SDR, which tell us who you've, the enrolments that you've done, the areas that you've done, the different subject areas, the priority areas, those sorts of things. So we have that information to be able to inform targeted conversations with you, which is the approach that we've used over the last couple of years. We want to know if you're making any significant changes to your provision, especially compared to the previous plan period. So talk to us, give us a heads up. That's always a really good idea. It's always a good idea to have those conversations with us before you submit your plan, where you've still got a chance to change or structure your plan based on conversations. Good news, not all providers will need to submit educational performance indicator commitments for the 27 investment. So you only need to submit and upload the EPICS template if your currently approved EPICS only go through to 2026. If you've already got EPICS loaded for 2027 into our systems, you don't need to provide them again this year. So once again, trying really hard to reduce the number of things that you need to do unnecessarily and keep this as streamlined as possible for you. So next steps, read the plan guidance and the templates. If you've got questions, please ask, okay? No problem at all asking questions. And we much prefer you ask those questions before you send us the information, because then we'll be able to assess the plans really robustly and consistently. And then we have made sure that we are avoiding a situation where you're having to repeat information unnecessarily. Engage early with your TEC relationship manager or the customer contact team. As I've said, those early conversations are really valuable. And they also give us a bit of a heads up about how your proposed provision fits within the constraints that we're working in, and where we might be needing to make tough decisions. And then get your plan in on time. 3rd of July is a big date. So submit your plan components by the 3rd of July this year. So that is enough of me talking. It's question time. So I would imagine that there have been a number of questions that have been posted, or people are thinking of them. I think Shelley and Jane are going to help me through this process. And somewhere in my notes, I know someone actually did ask us a question.
Yes, I'll just thank you, Gillian, for that. That was marvellous. I'm just scrolling through the questions now. And so we did have an early question. We can see in plan guidance that you have added more explicit performance expectations for the main TC funds. How do you intend to apply those when determining our 2027 funding? For example, will you be looking at our overall performance in a fund or making decisions at the high level, or will you be digging down into individual courses and qualifications and potentially making decisions to propose not to fund specific programs and qualifications? So quite a bit in that question, but
do you want me to answer?
Yes, that'll be fab.
Right. Well, to start with, well, in case you hadn't heard me, there are probably 20 times I've said it, performance matters. Okay, so improving those educational outcomes for New Zealanders really matters. So in our Clean Guidance, and we also have our response framework, which you'll find on the website, which takes you through the steps we go through when we potentially identify something we're not comfortable with. We'll be looking at educational performance indicators to inform those indicative allocations and final allocations. So we will be looking at that information as part of it, and that will include both your fund level performance and performance at a program and qualification level. So we may come to you and say, we're happy to continue funding you at this amount, but actually this particular qualification, we're either going to cap the amount we're going to fund, or we're actually not interested in funding that qualification anymore. So there will be a variety of responses, and it will be very customised to a provider's particular circumstances.
Great, thank you. And we've got another question here, and I'll read it out and we can decide who wants to tackle it. What is the TEC policy on enrolling unfunded learners /Fs where there are funding shortages? In addition, can we seek alternative sources of funding to support unfunded Fs, e.g. Ministry for Social Development or Ministry for Youth Development funding for youth job seekers? For youth job seekers, if declared and clearly managed separately?
Okay, well, that's a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question.
I've got one point to make about that, which I'm pretty sure all of our funds have a condition that you cannot access any other Crown funding without for these activities without our approval. So obviously it's a conversation you need to have with us first and foremost.
And I think for most unfunded learners that have been enrolled in a program on the qualification framework that we already fund, that you either get funding from TEC or you don't get other funding. You can still enrol them within the constraints. So as you know, you're able to enrol up to 105% of your allocation. If you want to go above 105%, then you need to seek approval from the TEC. We've got a process outlined on our website at the moment each month where we review it. This is a really live conversation that I have been having with a number of providers, because we have a broad range of different programs and qualifications, and for some of them, they have quite a big mix of people that actually want to get the qualification, and for others that are just studying it for interest. They don't get student loans and allowances, those sorts of things, and they do it all through one qualification. If we're only prepared to fund a small amount, what does that actually mean for the provider? So, but as a rule of thumb, I think, as Jane said, you can enrol unfunded learners, but you have to do it within the 105% or ask our permission. And I think one of the important things that goes into the decision that we'll make is what your capacity as an organisation is to absorb large numbers of learners who don't get tuition subsidy. We recognise you can still charge them fees, but that they won't get the tuition subsidy from TEC.
Excellent, thank you. Right, and another one here. Will there be any more specificity as to the updated priority areas for higher education? Last year it became very clear through differential funding rates, but with things like rocketry, AI and fibre being 2027 priorities, how should TEOs interpret these? I guess I can say that last year, through the budget decisions, there were some clear funding shifts to some priority areas, and so once budget was announced, we were able to include those. I think that the focus on science and technology and engineering and those sorts of priorities are clearly stated. Not all of them may receive additional boosts. I think, as Gillian has pointed out, we're in a very fiscally constrained environment, so you can be in fact, you probably should expect to be a priority, but without necessarily any funding boost. So we will make it very clear in supplementary plan guidance if funding rates change for any particular type of course or program, but we encourage you to interpret those priorities, I guess, as innovatively as you can, and tell us all about them in your plan.
I think that, as Jane said, our first protocol would be for us to expect that you would transition to delivering more priority areas within your existing provision and less non-priority areas, rather than expecting that there would be additional funding. Recognising that we're saying that we'll be looking to reduce the amount of non-priority delivery. There will always be a level of non-priority delivery, but the percentage as a part of the whole is going to decrease as we need to make tougher decisions about where we're putting funding.
Thanks, Gillian. And a question here, with any industry sector covered by a work-based learning unit that is transitioning to a new provider, does the funding follow if it meets TEC's priority areas?
Yes, so as part of the transition process, there is a transition plan. And as part of the approval of that plan is we will also approve funding to transition with those learners. So the funding will follow the learners initially. Then that provider will be assessed each year as everyone else is. But we want to ensure that those learners are well supported through the transition initially.
Thank you. Okay, I've got another question. If a provider is not due for a plan in 2027, so they're mid-cycle, can we assume their funding will remain stable with any variances in provision managed through supplementary significant plan amendments process? Sorry. So I see you're shaking your head.
I'm shaking my head because, as you know, everyone still has to submit a MOP, mix of provision, and we make a decision about each of those individual mix. The criteria putting in terms of your indicative.
Just you, I think I lost a sound a little bit there from you, Gillian. So you were saying every provider has to put in a MOP?
Has to put in a MOP, and every provider will receive an indicative allocation. That indicative allocation will be subject to everything I've talked about through this conversation. So we'll be looking for based on performance and non-priority areas. So if you have poor performance in low priority areas, you can have an expectation that your funding may be reduced, even if you're not submitting a strategic intent this year.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons for doing it through the indicative process is obviously everyone has an ability to respond and give us their views about those decisions, and we wanted to make sure that there was sufficient time to have good conversations about that before the end of the year.
Thank you. Okay, another question. Given the high probability of a significant volume of unfunded Fs in the system next year, what thought is being given to the level of permitted fee increases and an early confirmation of what that limit will be? This will be an essential element of consideration for many of us as we seek to strike viable budgets for next year.
As every other year, you will get an indication of that through the budget process. So the AMFM obviously goes out to a formal consultation, but through the budget process, you will get to hear what the government considers to be the maximum increase for the following year.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I've run out of questions to ask at this stage. Hopefully I've found everyone and asked them. So perhaps just wait for a moment to see if anyone's got any last minute thoughts. You can always post your questions to our customer contact team if they occur to you the moment you hang up, which is often what happens to me.
Then feel free to send them. Now, look, this was not supposed to be a depressing presentation. It's supposed to be a presentation to provide transparency and clarity in terms of what's happening and to help inform your planning for the next year. Because for many of you, I know that a growth strategy is what you're really keen to do. We're just wanting to be really honest with you that from where we're sitting at this point in time, and we haven't got budget decisions yet, we still see a situation where we will have less funding available next year than we will have enrolments. And so that means we have to make some tough decisions and we'll be needing to move some funding around the sector. The impact of the plan guidance, sorry, I was just going to say, will be very different for each individual organisation. Sorry, Jane.
No, and that's such a true comment. Well said. So I've got a couple more questions come in, and here's one. With a non-priority postgrad program, if developed as micro-quals, I guess, or micro-credentials perhaps, which as professional development are not funded by the TEC, and then they achieve credit recognition for the completion of their program, is that acceptable to TEC? So I think that's about, is it okay for micro-credentials as professional development to be formally assessed, receive credit recognition, but not be funded by us?
And your answer would be?
That's great. Yeah, no, that's all fine by us. You know, there is a lot of professional development across so many occupations, and once you're up and working, it becomes kind of, I guess, part of a cost of keeping up to speed in your occupation. And then here's another question. Where are we up to with the methodology and targets for distance travelled measures? These were mentioned in the tertiary education strategy. And I can say a few words because a team of mine is looking into this. So this won't, we're doing some initial scoping and have commissioned a little bit of work. We expect that, you know, it's not going to come out with a hiss and a roar, and once we've done a bit more work, definitely and consulted, and obviously we're working with the Ministry of Education closely on this, then we can come out to you. But it's not something that, you know, for instance, is going to feed into 2027 investment decisions for them.
And I think that's actually a really good point. In the new tertiary education strategy, there are a number of things which are discussed and raised as priority areas and talk about what are the ways or the initiatives that need to support them. Not all of them have been decided, agreed, worked through what they are. So what we've put into plan guidance are the things that are relevant for plan guidance, but the document is broader than that because it spans many years, and we'll be continuing to work through those as we go forward.
There's a question here about will flexible funding continue into 2027? I imagine.
I think at the moment it would be fair to assume that there isn't a proposed change to the funding determinations, which are the things which guide what we can do, and flexible funding would be continuing into 2027.
Yeah, and you
just as what I did hear this week, some confusion about when the government says it's going to fund 99% of forecast demand, how can you then get 102% through flexible funding? The 99% figure is there is a forecast demand of all the students that they think are going to be in tertiary, and then how much they think that would cost us to fund. So that's the big number, and they'll fund 99% of that big number. How we then break that down for individual providers, when we're doing your indicative allocations, we allow for the fact of that, we would have an expectation that a number of providers will get to 102%. So we build that into the indicative allocation process so that at the end of the year, we ensure we've got enough money to be able to fund everything, which once again goes to you don't automatically get 99% of what you think you're going to write, because we look at each of the individual organisations and the total amount of money we have, and it's a very big jigsaw puzzle to work through. So hopefully that made sense. So that's like a system number. Then we do different amounts for each organisation, recognising that we're going to have to allow for some to get funded above 100% in a year.
Yep, thanks for that. That can be a confusing situation, can't it?
Yeah.
There's a question here about, is there an indication from the Minister when TC may be in a position to meet priority demand? 2028, question mark.
Well, the thing is, we could meet priority demand now if we actually just took all the money away from non-priority and moved it into priority, because priority is only about 60%. So wherever we can, we are looking to fund as much priority demand as we can, and to look to get that as close to all of it being funded as we can. We also recognise that we need to have some care from a system point of view as we're moving money around and what the flow on implications are. But our objective is to be able to fund all true priority demand. I would say sometimes providers' interpretation of what's priority and what's TEC's interpretation are not quite the same. So if you're not sure, please check. And remember that it's also about your educational outcomes for the learners. So if you were delivering in a priority area, but you're really not meeting our thresholds, that does not guarantee you funding going forward. We would prefer to put that money to someone that is getting better educational outcomes for those learners.
Okay.
Any last questions, Jane?
Yep, there's one question about the Ministry's EFS forecast, but I think what we will do is pass that to the Ministry to answer. And
I'll just say that comes a bit through the government. So the government sets some sort of forecast factors. The Ministry then take those forecast factors and feed them into the education forecast. But I mean, that forecast used to be incredibly accurate, but the world has changed quite a lot over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. And so you are going to have some fluctuations. And when actually the government's got lots of money and demand's not so high, it's not a problem. But when we're in the situation and we're in the fiscal sort of environment that we're in, and more people are wanting to train, and the government's got less and less money because it needs to put into health or transport or fuel or whatever it is, that's when, even though the forecast may be out 1 or 2%, which normally doesn't matter, it's more felt by the sector, I think.
Yeah. Thanks. And one more question posted. Do you know if the student funding cap on aviation will be raised if this was set in 2013 and has not changed? Be good to open aviation training up to more students of all financial backgrounds.
So I think the conversation around funding with respect to aviation and some other sectors is obviously a live conversation, which there has been quite a lot of work on by peak bodies and things. The Ministry of Education fulfil the role of working out and working with the ministers in terms of what those funding rates are.
Okay. And so one more, if we've designed and implemented our own distance travelled tool or methodology that is relevant to our learners, can we use this in our investment plan to show achievement in the test priority area?
I think it would have absolutely no problem you sharing the metrics that you are internally using. That is fine. And we would obviously use them as part of our holistic assessment. That wouldn't mean that you won't also be assessed by the educational performance measures that we use for the rest of the sector, because that's a comparison. But we also look for mitigating factors. We know some people, we have different cohorts of learners, there are different impacts, which is why we say we don't make our decisions based on one factor. We look at a holistic range of factors. So if you have distance travel that you use and can provide that information to build your information you give us, then that would be great. Yep. And the team will be really interested in it.
They will.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you, Jane. Great job on
thank you.
Questions. Hopefully that has helped and not confused. Once again, if you have questions, please ask. This is a great time to ask. Beyond the outlook for budget announcements at the end of May and then the supplementary plan guidance, you'll get your indicatives in early June. Still gives you another month of being able to check in with us before your plans are due on the 3rd of July. So thank you for all the work that you are all doing to support learners across the country. We really appreciate it. That's why we get up every day, to ensure that learners are well supported. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and all the best for the year. Ka kite ono.
Ka kite.